What's the worst thing that happened at a wedding you went to? Before we start, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Story 1. It was a destination beach wedding, and the bride and groom allegedly spent over $100K on the entire thing, which was completely outdoors with no contingency plan for some reason, all for it to not only rain, but pour. It actually wouldn't have been so bad had they started on time, but the bride had everyone waiting for her for like 30 minutes. We just watched the sky get darker and darker in that time, then it just opened up and it came down cats and dogs right as the wedding party came out. It was already a bit awkward because in the water behind the altar was an ugly, rusty cargo ship getting close to shore, and there were folks off to the sides of the wedding area just enjoying the beach. At least the reception was fun once folks let go of caring about how they looked and smelled after getting drenched. Story 2. The brother of the groom stood up when the priest said, "If anyone who opposes the marriage between him and her, speak now or forever, hold your peace." The brother proposes to his girlfriend. Of 2 months, she is embarrassed, apologizing to everyone. She declined the proposal. The brother raged, accusing her of cheating and revealing he only proposed to see if she only had him. In his mind, if she said yes, it meant she's been loyal to him. But since she declined, it means she has been sneaking around. Gets better. He admitted he slept with 2 other people to revenge cheat. Story 3. Bride didn't show up. Everyone waiting in a huge church, including the groom waiting at the altar for 30 minutes. Then bride's father came in and announced that she had decided she didn't want to get married. But as he'd already paid for the reception, all the guests should go ahead with the party. Story 4. My cousin hired her friend who was supposedly a DJ, and he was literally playing music from Pandora. There were ads playing literally in between songs. Eventually, after some time, someone else went on the aux who actually had a subscription to a streaming service, LOL. Overall, it was a fun wedding, though. Story 5. 2 ex-waiters full-on karate fight in the reception hall. The rest of the waitstaff quickly shoved them into a back room, but after one of them got flipped over a table. 2 weeks later, best man and another guest almost fought. Then the best man's wife or guest GF did fight. It was crazy. I wasn't at this one, but my friend told me during a reception he was at, the bride's uncle parasailed over the reception towing a banner. A short time later, the power went out. Sometime later, a couple police officers showed up and explained the uncle accidentally hit some power lines and didn't survive. Story 6. The wedding was at a barn in the middle of nowhere. The food was brought in from the city, about 45 minutes away. Fried chicken, mac and cheese. I don't remember what else, but fun enough wedding. We get back to the hotel, which was maybe a 10-minute drive. The bride is throwing up in the parking lot. Okay, maybe she had too much to drink. A couple of other people throwing up in the parking lot. Well, they are young. That happens at weddings. Then I get upstairs and it hits me. I swear I threw up for 3 days. If I had died, that would have been fine with me. Worst food poisoning of my life. I found out after the fact that pretty much everyone was sick in some capacity. Good times. Story 7. I was probably 9-10 years old, so this was like 16 plus years ago. A family friend was getting married, the bride, so my family attended. The bride's father had passed due to a heart attack a few weeks prior. His wake and funeral service took place about a week before the wedding. He'd had a major cardiac event while driving on the highway and caused a car accident as a result, but he'd already died before his car ever came to a stop. Very sudden, traumatic all around. The wedding was beautiful. All sorts of efforts to honor the father of the bride were placed around the reception hall. A chair with his favorite coat and hat hanging on it were at the head table, with a sweet frame poem in the seat about always saving a spot for him. The father had even recorded himself singing the song for the father-daughter dance as a surprise to everyone long before he passed, and it played while the bride's only brother danced with her in his father's place. It was so sweet and so sad. The entire room of 300 plus guests were all bawling our eyes out. The mother of the bride had walked outside, presumably for fresh air, midway through the dance. It was a really emotional song and dance considering the circumstances, so no one thought anything of it that she'd need a second to collect herself. It came time for her to dance with the bride shortly after the father-daughter dance had ended, but she was nowhere to be found. The brother goes outside looking for her. We all hear him wailing in agony, and the guests rush outside to see the mother of the bride unresponsive on the ground. Major cardiac event. This family was all in the medical field, so cue a man in full formal attire doing chest compressions on a woman who's turned blue, while a frantic crowd tries to shield the children from seeing it and dispersed to call for help. It was a no cell phones reception, and we'd all been shuttled from the parking lot to the venue. Probably only 1.3 of a mile. So everyone is sprinting back to their vehicles to find a phone to call for help, complete with flowing gowns and tuxedos, down a gravel and dirt path. She didn't survive. Story 8, funniest one I ever heard of was when the bride, for a laugh, when asked the "do you take" question. She said no, just for a giggle. The vicar stopped the ceremony dead, said okay, and refused to marry them. They had to go through all the pre-marriage stuff again and get married some 6 weeks later. Story 9, I was a kid, bit into a bitter ball fresh from the deep fryer. The thing being hot enough to burn skin made me throw it in a reflex on the bride's wedding dress. Now I had a burnt mouth and saw the stain on her dress and started crying. The bride, being an absolute champion that she has comforted me, grabbed a dress fold and folded it over the stain like nothing ever happened. She's the kind of person I'm striving to be. Edit spelling. Story 10. The wedding venue was left open and someone stole all of the booze behind the bar the morning on the day of the wedding. Without tipping off the bride of the mishap, the groom gave the go-ahead to open all of the cards with money and send someone with a Costco card to buy all of the missing booze again. Bride obviously found out after the ceremony, but everything turned out great afterwards. But man, the stress we all went through. Story 11. Nothing crazy. But I was at a wedding where you were supposed to open these little envelopes and release a butterfly at the end of the ceremony. When we opened the envelopes, all the butterflies were either dead or almost dead. Super awkward. If you watch Bob's Burgers, there's a similar scene in an episode. The first time I saw it, I immediately thought of that wedding Lowell. Edit, I had no idea this comment would blow up like it did. Sad to hear other stories of dead butterflies. Story 12. The bride, who was my aunt, specifically told that the design she wanted are floral pastel pink and sky blue. The designer was agreeing, taking notes, and gave her the assurance that he would make it the way she wants. After the vows and all, we went to the after-party venue and it was Christmas-themed. Happy Merry Christmas to them, I guess. Story 13. So I went to a wedding held at a family-run go-kart track. Vows were nice, held by a big pond. The reception started and hamburgers were being served out of the go-kart snack bar. I knew the MOB had worked all summer for free as a waitress at a local restaurant in exchange for them catering the event. So I was very surprised to see all the family hucking burgers out the window. I went to McDonald's down the road because I've never liked their burgers, and they were struggling to keep up. Came back about an hour later. When I got back, there was a weird vibe in the air. I thought it was because the MOB had got scammed on the dinner agreement and everyone was reeling from it. People were still partying, but there was something going on in the main group and something in the air. I didn't see the bride and groom around too much in the main party area, no mingling. If I did see them, they weren't together and they were sticking close to their respective parties. Well, turns out the groom caught the bride with the best man. It had been going on for months. I felt so bad for the mob. It was the second wedding she's paid for her daughter. She got scammed. Then to find out that her daughter was hoeing it up and the marriage didn't even last as long as one of the many unpaid shifts she did to pay for it. Story 14. Oh boy, where do I start? The grandmother of the groom died. She died at the hotel in her sleep right after the wedding. Nobody saw it coming either. She was on her feet the entire evening. Most solemn continental breakfast I've ever been to. The vows were also quite awkward. To sum it up, the bride's vows basically were, I'll always remember to not bother you on Mondays and Wednesdays. Those are your designated gaming days. Also, some of the most awkward speeches I've ever heard in my life. Sister of the bride obviously did not like her sister's choice of husband and said as much during her speech. Story 15. A fight broke out during the reception and spilled out into the parking lot. The bride's father and groom, on the same side of the fight, were in the thick of it while the bride's mother was literally holding the bride down with wrestling moves in the back of the limo. Both the father of the bride and the groom were arrested, along with half a dozen others. The fight resumed at the hotel after everyone got bailed out, and even more people got arrested, including the bride, who didn't have her mom to hold her back. No honeymoon, felony assault as a wedding gift for both the bride and groom. The weird thing is that none of this was gang-related, and there was no beef going into it. Just one of the groom's friends was a really angry drunk, and someone bumped him at the buffet, and some of the other jackasses just couldn't let things go. It was insane. We were there as friends of the bride's parents, and we were in the limo while the bride was screaming, "My daddy," about her father being in the fight out in the parking lot, and mom had her arms and legs wrapped around her. Story 16. Certainly not the worst, but at my own wedding, it stormed so violently as the guests walked from their cars into the church that no umbrella could keep them from getting absolutely soaked. I'm talking drenched. A lightning strike took out the power, so the mic's audio system didn't work. You couldn't hear a thing that the pastor or anyone said. Also, the church had no AC, and it was the middle of summer in 100% humidity. My sister, the maid of honor, fainted at the altar both from the heat and locking her knees. Don't lock your knees. Luckily, my uncle caught her, and she made a quick recovery. Alas, the show went on. The sun eventually came out for the reception. Still insane humidity. Everyone drank the venue out of booze, and my husband and I are still happily married 15 years later. Story 17. I almost died on my way to my own damn wedding with my father in the car. We were driving to the church in a limo that my dad knew the owner from the bar. That should have been a red flag. Well, everything was nice except the old man. Driver was faced at 11 a.m. We didn't know he was so drunk until he blew through a stop sign on a tight turn on a 2-lane country road. I was at that moment I was telling my dad he was going too fast to stop around the bend. Straight ahead was a farmer's field. Miraculously, no one was driving on the other road when we blew through the intersection, or that no one was sitting at the stop sign. I would guess he was probably doing 40-45 Don't ask me how he managed to get out of the field, but he did. I clearly remember my father ripping him a new one. BC, he had been so drunk and that he nearly killed us. This happened in 1988. Story 18. Well, there was the fight between the groom's family and some cousins that showed up. But there was a far more interesting wedding I went to, where the father of the bride gave a long, preachy speech that focused almost 90% on how his daughter was an obedient child. I mean, you might mention that point in the context of showering praise on someone, but this was specifically a speech about obedience to him, to her soon-to-be spouse, and obedience to God. It was over the top. And to put the cherry on top, when the preacher presented the new bride and groom, somebody lit off firecrackers on the altar inside the church. There was smoke everywhere. Story 19. I was a +1 at a wedding where I barely knew the groom and had only met the bride once before. During the reception, I stopped at the bathroom and found the bride sitting alone in the big stall crying. She didn't want to get married but did because she and the groom had. She wasn't pregnant, but as a Mormon, she felt she had to marry him. She was only 19 and felt she was too young to get married, but didn't feel like she'd had a choice. I stayed with her for about half an hour comforting her until her grandma came in and took over. I went back to the party and her groom was oblivious to the fact that his new wife was missing, let alone that she was devastated. My, now, husband lost track of that friend after he got married. We ran into him years later and asked how he was doing. The two of them had 4 kids under the age of 5, and he was thrilled to be a dad. I wonder how she felt, and if he had any idea how she felt. Story 20. My sister had a seizure at my wedding, and my mother made such a huge spectacle over it, super dramatic and fake crying. My sister is like, Jesus Christ, you called an ambulance? I'm fine. My mother wouldn't allow me into the bridal suite. BC, she didn't want to upset me. I just wanted to freaking eat. Finally, I just barged in, and my sister and I just stuffed our faces, and she relaxed in the suite to recover. I think it was the camera flashes that triggered it. But my mother loves to make a huge deal out of everything. Anything for attention. Story 21. Father of the groom's speech went a little something like this. Bride, we never thought he'd marry you. You wasn't his first love. A 20-minute monologue of the groom's love for cars and his love of his son and granddaughter, then end speech. Nothing about the bride, nothing nice about the bride or welcoming her to the family, just, we didn't think he'd marry you. I was absolutely floored. Story 22. The bride's family didn't turn up. Not one. They didn't agree with her marrying a white man. Edit. He was white and Welsh. She was Indian and I think Muslim, though I could be wrong on her faith. After the wedding, she got death threats from her dad and brothers for dishonoring the family, so her and her hubby moved to New Zealand, where they are now living their best lives. Story 23. Friend's wedding at a country club. They were in the middle of their vows during the ceremony. All of a sudden, we heard a loud crash. One of the bride's young nephews, I think was 5 at the time, had taken one of the golf carts and crashed it into a tree. Kid was okay, shaken up, but yay put a damper on the event. Story 24. Not my story, but there was a young lady who knew about the free dessert offered by most restaurants if it was your birthday. She made a habit out of asking for it at every new restaurant her and her friends went to. So, on her wedding day, when the bridal procession started, they let her get about 25% down the aisle. Then the music stopped and everyone started singing Happy Birthday to You. Story 25. An older family member was asked to be in the wedding party. Really sweet, but also this person is probably about 80 years old and standing through a ceremony that had all sorts of extra readings and songs to include different people. Right about the time I was thinking, man, this is a long ceremony. They passed out, 911 was called, and they were taken to receive medical attention. It was very upsetting. People were crying. The ceremony paused until medical help arrived, but the ambulance was still out front when we left the church, and they still made us stand there blowing bubbles as they exited the church for the photos. So that was weird, LL. They're okay now, but didn't make it back for family photos or the reception, so that's a shame. Side note, the officiant said a wedding party member passing out has happened in about 10% of the weddings he's officiated. Let your favorite people sit down if you want a long ceremony, LOL. Story 26, Wedding Photographer. I've seen a lot of weddings. The most awkward one, though, was when the bride was 4 hours late to her own wedding. She kept telling him she was just finishing getting ready, and they had a car service for the wedding, so she couldn't blame a broken-down car. She waltzed into the venue like she didn't stink, didn't apologize to the guests still left over, and the venue and vendors. It opened her groom's eyes, I think, because he called it off right then and there. She threw a tantrum, and as a contracted vendor, I didn't want to leave in case they worked it out, but I got to watch him say stuff that was obviously built up over time. When he left with his parents is when I was like, I'm out, bye. Story 27. Wedding was for the daughter of a very religious conservative family who had found out that the daughter and her boyfriend were having premarital and basically pressured them into getting married to fix the sin they'd committed. The mother, father, and priest took every opportunity during the ceremony and reception speeches to remind everyone that the bride and groom had premarital and say how disappointed they all were that the marriage was starting in sin. Story 28. The drunk uncle of the bride was hitting on all the bridesmaids and said one of the most hilarious things I've ever heard. Look at the shitter on that critter. Talking about a bridesmaid's ass. He had to get removed and ended up wandering around in his underwear in the parking lot. Story 29. The groom was on his phone the entire time. I flew Mexico for the destination wedding with my kids, and he chose one of the most expensive hotels and he looked bored at his own wedding. Leading up to the wedding, he claimed he was sick and had the hotel staff getting him cold towels and checking on him. Drama king. Up until the ceremony, I and the rest of the bride friends were hoping she was going to back out. I was her MO-ation. Story 30. I was at a wedding where the bride and groom had a Rottweiler that they really loved, and they'd had him in some pretty intense training. The dog was even part of the ceremony as the ring bearer. But then at the reception, in the middle of their first dance, a guy kicks open the door of the ballroom and charges in shouting, "Babe, I miss you. Don't do this." And the bride was all like, "What are you doing? This is over. I don't want to see you." And the guy lunges at her, and suddenly the dog attacks him. It bites down on his arm and wrestles him to the ground. People started screaming and kids were crying, and the whole thing was just chaos. And then suddenly the guy stands up like nothing happened, and the bride announces that he's their dog trainer, and this was a demonstration of the dog's defensive abilities. He takes a bow and then has the dog do a couple of tricks. We all kind of politely applauded. He walked out of the room, and then they finished their first dance like this was not an absolutely traumatic experience for everyone else. Story 31. Oh, my wedding. My wife was going to walk out to Here Comes the Bride. I'm standing there in front of a huge crowd. The organist starts playing it, and my mom, who I hadn't spoken to in over a decade, starts walking down the aisle in a white dress. She was invited, but I didn't expect her to come. She showed up at the very last minute, and my wife kind of panicked and said, "Just go find a seat," when she walked in. It was perfectly bad timing. I had about 30 seconds of thinking, am I in a Freudian nightmare? Story 32. Our friends got married. My wife and I left early because she wasn't feeling well and was tired. She was pregnant with our son. Few hours after we left, our other friend, who was our driver, came to hit us in a hurry and told we dodged a major drama bullet. First mistake of the soon-to-be-married couple was to only have 3 pallets of beer, cider, and long drink for all the guests. can't remember how many people. And they told us in advance without remembering both sides had many relatives who liked to drink, so there was many pocket bottles. The bridesmaids fucked the coffee catering somehow and thought it was a good idea to start giving the alcohol instead to people. Second mistake was that the bride and groom both had younger brothers who hated each other, and they made them both as bestmans. The hatred combined with alcohol was a recipe for a disaster, and would you know they started a fight? I till this day don't know which one started the fight, but soon the groom joined, bride's father, uncle, etc. In the end, it was just a giant fight with multiple people from both sides, and I felt bad for Teeter Bride because she was witnessing and bawling her eyes out while watching this clusterfuck unfold in front of her. Story 33. Everyone got food poisoning from the cake. First, the bride was feeling queasy and accidentally revealed to the whole family she was pregnant, which meant my ex's bride's Nana wanted to go home early because she was devastated. On the drive home, ex's sister starts to feel sick and the dad refuses to stop, so she just vomits out of the open door while we drive a bit slower. I made it to their house before I projectile vomited strawberries all over a white wall. Back at the venue, 80% of guests are having the same experience. Apparently there's no room in the bathrooms, so people are just puking at the table. It took hours for people to be able to get home because there was a mad scramble to leave, and it caused a traffic jam leaving the venue, and there was at least one fender bender. We went the next day to help clean, still feeling dreadful, pink vomit everywhere. I think I got 5 minutes in before bailing and heard about it endlessly from his mother till we broke up 8 months later. Story 34. I used to work in a hotel where we often hosted weddings. The worst was probably when the bride and her new mother-in-law were both very drunk and started physically fighting at the reception. Torn clothes, blood, smashed glass. It was not pretty. But it must have seemed pretty normal to the family and guests, as after the combatants were taken off to their rooms to clean up, and we swept up the mess, the party carried on for another few hours, including the groom, who I can only assume wasn't Mr. Popular with either his wife or mother the next morning. Story 35. All a couple of the groomsmen burst out into laughter when the father of the bride started crying while giving his daughter away. I was one of the groomsmen, but not one of the ones laughing. The thing is, the father of the bride was this burly, gruff military dude, and there was something about seeing this guy we'd basically always been afraid of crying while butterfly kisses played over the speakers that caused a couple of dudes to lose it. I felt bad because it was an asshole thing to do. Story 36. My white trash cousin was getting married in the Catholic Church, and she and her equally white trash groom's friends were basically tailgating with a keg before the wedding in the church's parking lot. Before starting the wedding, the priest made a pretty pointed comment about being respectful, and when the bride's brother got to the altar, as a groomsman, it is typical to stand before the priest and make the sign of the cross, and he did so with his middle finger. I wasn't there because I don't associate with that branch of the family tree, but I heard about it afterwards. Apparently, the priest continued the wedding and didn't acknowledge it. Honestly, I think he should have walked away and ended the ceremony. Story 37. The wife fell ill just after the ceremony with some allergic reaction thing and got rushed off in an ambulance, and everyone continued to party? I was so confused but joined in anyway, and by the evening came around 8 p.m. she came back and a huge grand entrance was made. Iconic, but so peak for the wife. She is a work colleague to me, and we're nurses, so when she got rushed into A&E in her wedding dress, it was humiliating for her. Story 38. Best man professed his love during his speech, and Not So Subtlety said it should have been him instead. Best man also volunteered to be the DJ for the bride and groom to save them money before the wedding. After the ceremony, he went to the DJ booth and played 2 EDM songs before flicking the entire wedding off and leaving. Oh, and the groom's mom had a massive center of attention problem and dragged her husband onto the dance floor in the middle of the first dance. Story 39. The best man had replaced the rings at the last minute in a prank that went a little further than it should. In what was a series of escalating pranks among the wedding party, the bride and groom had to exchange their vows using plastic LED flashing rings from a little prize machine from a grocery store. The bride was pretty mad, but it wasn't totally out of line with the casual and friendly tone of the wedding. For example, they had a roast instead of a toast during the reception. Honestly, the worst part of that wedding was that the DJ ended up needing a ride to the wedding, which somehow became the bride's responsibility, causing her to be an hour late to the ceremony. This DJ took requests, but in what was either his own private prank or a sign of early dementia, would abruptly cut off the requests halfway through and start playing Sublime instead. Not even mixing them in, just pushing stop on the requested track and pushing play on Sublime. I heard Santeria probably 7 times that day. The happy couple later got back at the best man at his own wedding by providing a groom's cake that was just a professionally frosted block of butter. The best man then apologized to them, and all parties declared a truce, which was shortly before their ugly divorce. It was me. I was the best man, and while I hate butter, at least I'm still married. Story 40. The DJ and his girlfriend, who was the sister of the groom, broke up at the beginning of the reception after a huge fight, so he packed up his equipment and skedaddled. Had to send someone to get a boombox. This was back in the late 80s, so there would be music for the remainder of the night. Story 41. At the reception, when the bride and groom, my cousin 30 Mariners, came in, they did some little speeches before dinner and dancing. He talked about how hard she worked to please enjoy the food as it was very stressful for her, and about how much he loves her and how excited he is for their future. Her speech was her complaining about how stressful it was, how she just wanted to elope and didn't really want any of this. She literally said, "I want to thank me," multiple times. She didn't say anything about my cousin. It was all about her. My aunt looked over at me like, Story 42. I was a supervisor. I only had 2 other people working under me, one of them inviting me to his wedding. I knew that the ceremony was going to be small and expensive, so I only went to the reception when I showed up. There was nothing there. It was an empty hall. Apparently his parents had opposed the marriage but pretended like they were on board, didn't buy the rings, kept his children away from the ceremony, lied, and said they had booked the hall and decorations and catering, and nothing had been done. So I got there to the bride's family, who were enraged. They ordered chicken and put out some tables last minute, booking the venue, and when he showed up with the bride, her brothers tried to fist fight him. All in all, an absolute fiasco. Story 43. Not really worst, but funny regardless. My friend had a full weekend wedding where the venue allowed alcohol as BYOB, but no hard liquor, so his dad filled up the bed of his pickup truck with beer, wine, and hard seltzer. He had to go back out the morning of the wedding to get more, because we killed so much of it around a bonfire the night before. At a different wedding, there was an old family friend. I think it was like Grandpa's war buddy, but Grandpa was deceased, who was getting along with everyone and was just being a really fun, goofy old dude. The guy gets plastered, but everyone has been buying him drinks all night, so he doesn't have a tab. It took the bartender a solid 5 minutes to convince this man that he doesn't have a tab to close out, and he's free to give a tip if he wants, but they do not need his money. Story 44. Worst is relatively minor for us, and it was only bad for my husband and I, but friend who has been at our wedding a month prior copied everything about our wedding. All the decor, the music, used in the same parts of the ceremony and reception, including first dance and parent dances, the way they introduced their party to the reception, everything. It was hard to see our year of decision-making, negotiations with each other, creativity, and our sentimental moments just copied and pasted. Story 45. I didn't go to this one, but I got several calls afterwards. About 10 years ago, my cousin got married and my mother attended. My cousin had disposable cameras left on the tables for the guests to take photos of the reception. That way she could develop them later and see all the fun that her guests had at her wedding. My mother decided to take several of the cameras into the bathroom with her and take close-up photos of her lady bits. They were able to recognize that it was my mother due to a unique ring that she wears being visible in the photo. My cousin was justifiably horrified. At that time, I still didn't completely understand my mother's mental health issues, so I internalized a lot of this and felt a lot of shame for what she did. Now I understand that my mother has BPD and does extreme things to get attention. My cousin is a very wonderful and kind person and is still very happily married to her partner. Grateful we are able to talk about this now with some humor. We are both no contact with our mothers. Story 46. My wife walked in on her cousin, the bride, making out vigorously with some other dude. The groom was drunk as and presumably high on opioids and passed out in another room. Wasn't casual making out. There were hands in orifices, etc. The cousin has a problem with copying my wife's everything. Right down to when we got engaged, she practically dropped everything to find someone to marry. I wish I were exaggerating. It's pathological. This dude was practically a random smackhead. And next thing we know, they're getting married a couple months before us, okay? She even asked if they could use our wedding decor, all paid for and set up for their wedding, and they'd give it back after. Hard no there. Walked into the hall they rented. Looked like a damn clan meeting. Like I thought I went to the wrong place for a moment before I saw a couple relatives I knew. Looked like someone just randomly picked up backwoods hillbillies in whatever they were wearing at the time. There was some wild and stained outfits there. Was just all ramshackle and thrown together last minute for the purpose of being first. It lasted, well, a little longer than I'd have figured, but when he started beating her, that was about it. Story 47, I witnessed the worst wedding toast at a friend's wedding. The bride's father and sister both gave lovely, heartfelt speeches, as did the father of the groom. Enter the groom's brother. By this point in the reception, he was already several drinks deep and looking kind of disheveled. Untucked shirt, sleeves rolled up, pants sagging. He gets up there in front of 150 plus people and starts off with a snarky, "I didn't write anything down," referring to the other speakers who had all read their toasts off their phone paper notes. He then launched into a diatribe about relationships and how jealous he is of his brother's relationship and his parents' relationship and how unlucky he is in relationships. The whole thing was really weird and he kept repeating himself. Then he put a cherry on that sundae by looking at his brother and telling him to ride her more than you ride your Harley. Story 48. The best man gave his speech about how no one liked the bride. Later, another guy got drunk, stole the caterer's golf cart to do burnouts, then did the worm and split his chin on the dance floor, bleeding everywhere. The photographer loved it, but the bride was less than impressed. I remembered another one. Went to a friend's wedding, and at the reception they had tea lights going on high-top tables. Some woman with big 80s hair was drunk, cackling, and threw her head back. Boom. Her hair went up in a ball of fire. Thrown drinks in a jacket got it under control. But she left quickly, and the whole venue smelled of burnt hair. Story 49. I worked at a wedding catering company and venue for a couple summers in college, so I have a fair share of interesting wedding stories. Not crazy, just the opposite. The couple that met at Wana Orie, and it was a completely dry wedding. Wedding started at around 5 p.m., and by 8:30 or so, everyone had left. I'd say about 75% of the guests were sneaking off to a bar on property and getting drinks, shots. The bride and groom were disappointed and just wrapped things up. I truly felt bad for them. The bride's estranged father showed up to see the ceremony. Despite causing quite a scene, family and guests were able to keep him away, and he left without the bride or groom knowing he showed it all. However, he came back a few hours later, well into the reception. At that point, people were drinking, and some of the groomsmen were not having it. A fight broke out, multiple punches were thrown, bride was crying, cops were called, multiple arrests. It was a mess but would have made for good TV. Groom got caught cheating with another guest less than an hour after being married. The bride walked in on them in his dressing room and of course stormed out to let her family know what was going on. The groom and guest disappeared like dogs slinking away, tails between their legs. I honestly have no idea where they went, but were last seen just walking away from the venue on the shoulder of the road. Worst part, for me, was that we still had to present a bill to the bride's father for the rental space, food, booze, etc. He was super pissed, of course, and was mumbling to telling me how he's going to wring every last cent out of the groom for everything he had caused. Star Wars-themed wedding, they walked down the aisle to the Imperial March, which seemed like a strange choice. But I have to admit, this was one hell of a fun group. They partied and kept to the theme with the cantina music playing during dinner, and lots of references made throughout the night. Groom had an allergic reacting to food served earlier in the day. He eventually started having a hard time breathing, so they rushed through the ceremony, immediately did some photos, and jumped right into the cake cutting for the sake of pictures. An ambulance came and the groom needed tracheostomy on his way to the hospital. They were supposed to fly out the next day for the honeymoon too, but couldn't for obvious reasons. Reception still went on, but the energy was obviously off, with some guests announcing updates as they heard. The food causing the allergic reaction was served by the venue, and they were sued. I have no idea how much it was for, but they settled out of court, so I imagine the bride and groom were well taken care of monetarily. Those are some of the best, but I have more, and will share other as people like these stories. Story 50. 2 stories, neither of which were catastrophic by any means, but they were both really strange. During the music they play, while everyone is arriving, but before the ceremony starts, the last song was performed by the mother of the bride. She came out and started singing From This Moment by Shania Twain, and it was clear from 3 notes in that the woman couldn't hold a tune in a suitcase. She warbled her way through the entire damn song, accompanied only by a violinist. There was no drowning it out. She was as loud as she was awful. I spent most of it staring intently at the wedding program because I was concerned about what my face would look like if people could actually see it. I hate secondhand embarrassment with a passion. It was the longest 3 minutes ever. I found out later that the bride was well aware that her mother could not sing, but her mother thought she could and insisted upon singing. And since she was paying for the wedding, the bride couldn't put her foot down. Her tears when walking down the aisle were partly from joy and partly from humiliation. The second wedding was a full Greek Orthodox ceremony. The husband was a part of that religion. The bride was not. I was attending on the bride's side, sitting with another mutual friend. The program for this wedding was 7 pages long, explaining all of the traditions. For example, they repeat things 3 times a lot because of the Holy Trinity. After about 45 minutes, they get to the part with the vows. Do you, Catherine? This would seem perfectly normal, except the bride's name was Robin. The priest kept repeating Catherine over and over again. It was an older priest, and I was thinking, is he getting her confused with another bride and everyone's just rolling with it? Turns out they forgot to mention in the 7-page program that the priest would be using the bride's baptismal name, not her actual name. We only found out because my friend got some liquid courage at the reception and asked her about it directly. Story 51. This was years ago at my sister's wedding to the jackass of all jackasses. She sat in a chair so her husband could take off her garter and then toss it to the single men. He slid her dress up to reveal her garter, and before taking it off, yelled out to the crowd, "Hey everybody, what do you think of my breeding stock?" People at the reception literally gasped. My sister just laughed it off like it was the funniest thing ever. It really didn't surprise her because this guy had been a sexist jerk on a regular basis long before they married. He used to pontificate to me and my younger sister when we were young teens that it's okay for a man to rape his wife because once a woman says her wedding vows, there's implicit consent for at any time. Yep, they're still married and now have kids and grandkids, and he's been a complete jerk every day since then. But she won't divorce him because it would be embarrassing and also make Jesus cry, and we can't have that. Story 52. Not the worst, but pretty weird. I got a printed wedding invitation for 7 p.m. I arrived at 6:40, and the doors to the church were locked, and the parking lot was empty. I walked around the entire church. Everything was locked. Rechecked my invitation. Yep, 7 p.m. wedding. So I go to get something to eat and come back around 7:15. People are just starting to arrive. It turns out the wedding started at 8 p.m., and I had a Latin-sounding last name. The bride was Hispanic and had 2 sets of invitations printed. Latinos got the 7 p.m., Gringos got the 7:30 time. Crazy they knew everyone would be late. Story 53. Pretty much none of my friends could come because of COVID rules changing right before. Photographers only took photos of the bride getting ready. I felt alone until the wedding started. We had no dancing due to COVID fears and expected to have a party post-COVID. After pregnancy, my wife completely changed and never wanted to do anything anymore. She had her family live with us for a year, which was terrible. She started traveling for work half the time, didn't make any time for me or our son. Then she left. No post-pandemic party, no effort for our relationship, never looked at the wedding photos or videos, didn't show up to co-parenting counseling, 4-year spiral. Story 54. I was at my cousin's wedding and another wedding was taking place on the other side of the reception venue. I went to the toilet, which was shared, and there I saw the bride with her maid of honor. The bride is crying, and while I'm washing my hands, I'm trying not to listen in too much. But to cut a long story short, her husband is completely drunk, acts like an aunt has insulted her, and then they both ask me if I don't want to take them somewhere else. I didn't have a car that night, so I declined, but I imagine it would have ended pretty badly if I'd gone off with her. Another guest obviously took her away a little later. Another time, another cousin, this time it was she who got married. 2 days later, her husband had a schizophrenic attack and tried to kill her. That's how I learned that in France there's a 7-day period during which you can cancel a marriage without having to go before a judge. One last one. This is my best friend's cousin who was due to get married at 35. When the wedding night arrived, she panicked and didn't want her husband, so she ran off into the night. As the marriage had not been consummated, it was annulled and she continued her life in a monastery. She's 60 and still there. Story 55. When I was in college, my mom's best friend got married abroad with an extravagant fancy black tie affair. Mom was the MOH. My dad walked the bride down the aisle, and my sisters and I were part of the bridesmaid party. Gorgeous wedding. We had an awesome time, danced all night. Early the next morning, as we were getting ready for the post-wedding brunch, we found out my grandma, Mom's mom, died. My mom was devastated, we all were, but she insisted we not tell anyone and to wipe our tears, put on a smile, and pretend to have fun so we wouldn't ruin the couple's wedding weekend. She said we could cry on the plane on our way home, but for now we were to bring nothing but joy to the party. Years later, my mom died. At her memorial, her bestie shared some pics of us from that wedding weekend. You can see my mom's smile beaming, but her eyes looked so sad. Her friend didn't have a clue what mom was going through at the time. She didn't find out until she got back from her honeymoon. So she only had fond memories of that weekend. Mom was a good friend. Story 56. Not major, but my brother's ex-girlfriend was just insufferable. She insisted on using the men's room for absolutely no reason other than to be antagonistic. She got angry and offended when the men weren't comfortable using the bathroom with her there, which is a very reasonable thing to be uncomfortable with. She was literally just creating a situation so she could have a reason to be mad. It was incredibly weird. Story 57. Groom started crying in the middle of the ceremony, then puked all over the place. Another wedding, the parents of the bride got in a massive argument out in the parking lot and left the celebration. This was after the bride had, I'm not even joking, a long film about her life playing, with stops at certain points where her teachers from 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, etc., got up to talk about what she was like at those ages. And they didn't open the bar until after the film finished. I heard the parents of the bride later got divorced. ETA, puking, crying groom, and his bride also later got divorced. Story 58. The wedding party was basically tailgating in the church parking lot. Beer cans everywhere. Bride was so drunk they had to delay the wedding for about a half hour as they tried to sober her up. She was basically be held up by anyone with her. She did somehow make it through the ceremony, but then never made it the reception. The groom, who was also not in the best shape, at least made an appearance. Story 59. A friend of ours were getting married in an outdoor venue in New Orleans, and unfortunately, a hurricane, Cat 4, came down. I had already had my doubts about the wedding since it was at a plantation, and to my mind, having a wedding at a plantation is like having one in Auschwitz. But my husband insisted. It was his friend from college, and they had been close, never dated, just very good friends. As the hurricane got closer and closer, and the night before a warning went out to leave now or possibly be trapped the day after, I put my foot down and said, no, the gods are telling us something, and we need to evacuate now. So we called the bride and said, we're sorry, but we have CPAPs and we'll literally die in our sleep if we don't have power, so we have to get out of the path of the hurricane. Most of the guests bailed like we did, and so did the photographer and catering company, but the bride refused to cancel, which was incredibly selfish of her since she was putting the priest, usher officiant, and staff at the plantation at risk. They got married inside a cramped plantation house as the hurricane rattled the windows, and all they had to eat was the cake they had delivered to the house the day before. 2 cars got stuck in standing water. The bride tried to put a happy face on it with a post to Facebook. We survived this storm. We can survive anything. Marriage was doomed. Turns out the groom had been cheating for months with a friend of the bride's. Not long after he proposed, and she started making arrangements for the wedding, they were divorced within the year. Kids, don't have a wedding at a plantation. You do not want that toxic karma, particularly in a part of the country where voodoo is a thing. Story 60. About 10 years ago, a relative got married to the love of his life. When I entered the church, I recognized one of his colleagues to whom he had always referred to as his work wife. Turned out that he also had a work child. The work wife had brought their toddler with her that was a little copy of my relative. The bride did not spot her, but her family and the groom did. They got divorced shortly after the wedding, and my relative is now married to his work wife. Story 61. Shy, virginal bride and drunk, obnoxious groom. As they did their rounds to the tables at the reception, he would loudly recite, "Roses are red, violets are blue. Today we get drunk, and tonight we screw," while leering at his bride. There was a fight started on the dance floor ending in the parking lot, with men in the bridal party. Police were called, black eyes and fat lips. and the horrified bride standing helplessly on the dance floor with blood on the hem of the white satin gown she made herself. Story 62, wedding I filmed. Guest had a heart attack during the ceremony. The groom was a firefighter, so he immediately charged into action, administering chest compressions and telling the staff exactly what to say when they called 911 to streamline getting help. The guest survived. The mood for the remainder of the ceremony was very subdued. Weddings that happened at a hotel I worked at. Bride's father got in a car accident on the way to the ceremony and didn't survive. Groom and the bride's father got into a fist fight and both were arrested. Bride sat in the lobby crying for basically the rest of the night. Story 63. At a wedding I was performing, the bride and groom had just kissed and I was about to introduce them as Mr. and Mrs. And one of the bridesmaids passes out, hits the floor, dress up over her head, thong out for everyone to see. The bride and groom don't skip a beat. Rolling their eyes, they barely even glance at her. She was faking. They knew she was going to do something for attention, and this is what she chose. We finished the ceremony with her on the floor. Story 64. I got invited to a wedding as a +1 with a guy I had been dating for a month. I didn't know anyone there. As the ceremony is about to begin and the groom takes the altar, my stomach dropped into my ass. I had seen that same guy on Tinder 3 months prior. We had matched. We had talked. I told my date, Holy, I saw this guy on Tinder. My date was like, you must have him mistaken with someone else. They've been together for 7 years now. I said, no, I swear that's him. My date says, maybe it was an old account he forgot to delete. I've heard about that happening to people, and it ruins relationships. I said, no, I matched with him and talked to him, and I remembered I had his number in my phone. I pull it up. It is the groom's number. My date is in shock. Doesn't know what to say besides, damn, I always thought he was such a good dude. And we both just sat there awkwardly through the whole wedding like, we still haven't said anything to anyone about it to this day. Story 65. I got married. Seriously though, I offered to make sorbet for my son and his fiancée for their August outdoor reception. 600 invitees. Spent the entire summer making 6 different flavors using homemade syrups rendered from real fruit and cane sugar. I had 10 people storing 2-gallon tubs of sorbet in freezers throughout the land. Bought a patio chest and insulated it and used dry ice to store the sorbet at the event. The night of the event in August, a freak cold front moves through and it's 54F and raining. I was giving tubs of delicious sorbet to anyone who would take one. Story 66. At our wedding a month ago, one of the bridesmaids, my husband's sister, was vomiting all morning before the wedding. She was pregnant and thought it was due to continued morning sickness and stress. She ended up having to leave right after the ceremony with her husband and eventually ended up at the ER and left her 2-year-old toddler with her mom, my husband's mom, at the wedding. My husband's mom ended up throwing up right before she gave her speech at the ceremony. Right after my husband whispered in my ear that she had just thrown up, and I was like, oh, is this a viral thing that will spread? We looked over to our parents' table, and a cocktail napkin somehow caught fire from one of the centerpiece candles that was in a glass hurricane holder for the record, and spread to the tablecloth. My husband and I poured water glasses on the fire, so luckily most guests didn't notice it. But we were definitely shaken. His mom then had to leave right after the son-mom dance because she threw up again, and she took her granddaughter and husband, my husband's dad, because he's disabled so he couldn't be solo. So his sister, mom, dad, and brother-in-law missed a lot of the ceremony. His niece was sitting on his mom's lap during her speech babbling and watching YouTube, which was definitely distracting to us and our guests. About 24 hours later, my husband and I were also violently ill. So was his dad and his brother and my sister's boyfriend. His sister was patient 0 the morning of the wedding, but we didn't realize it was an illness, or we would have handled the whole thing differently. Story 67. My wife's younger sister's wedding about 20 years ago. My wife's family is from rural North Georgia. Her little sister works for Walmart, and her soon-to-be husband does random jobs for the DOT. Pretty much fit the stereotype of what one would expect of Southern white trash. Anyhow, the wedding day finally arrives and it is being held in a small church that is really well off the beaten path, even by North GA standards. Small, desolate, and just felt odd from the start. So we settle in, and I'm looking for a restroom before the ceremony. I get directions and must have opened the wrong door. As of that moment, I found myself in the room where the snakes are kept. Yes, it's one of those types of churches. Fast forward, the I-dos have wrapped up, and the bride and groom are heading out of the chapel. Soon thereafter, after a gentleman yanks a younger individual and forcefully escorts him out of the building. The scuffle breaks out in the parking lot. Me being nosy, I head out to see what the commotion is about. It's revealed that the younger gentleman reached over the pew during the wedding ceremony and stole the wallet out of the purse of the lady sitting in front of him. The lady turns out to be his own aunt, both from my now brother-in-law's side of the family. Anyhow, we live out of state and don't see them very often. It has turned into a bit of an ongoing joke in that whenever we arrive to an event where they or their family members are, I always remind my wife and kids to leave anything valuable in the car. Because if they are willing to steal from their own family, they are most certainly willing to steal from us. Story 68. Not nearly at the level of some of the other stories here, but at my best friend's wedding, after the ceremony, the wedding party and family piled into 3 limos to drive to the venue for the reception. I was the sole exception. I had flown down and rented a car, and by luck was given a Charger SRT because the car I reserved wasn't ready. I wanted to drive that bad boy as much as possible, which was a good thing because the limo with the bride, groom, and like 6 bridesmaids, groomsmen broke down on... Honestly, I don't know which major freeway it was in LA. 405 maybe? Somewhere in Tustin. In any event, I saw the limo on the side of the road, hood up, my friend in her dress on the shoulder, obviously upset, and was able to screech to a stop in front of them, open the door, and say, "Liz, Jason, hop in, I got you," and then roar off, leaving the rest of them on the side of the road. Liz and Jason think I'm a hero. The wedding party thinks I'm a prick. Don't care. I wish I'd had some shades to flick down when I took off. Edit. Oh, and once I got them in the car, I punched it. I think we hit 130 at one point. Not exactly what you would call a safe or legal, but god damn it, my friends had just gotten married and I'd rescued them from a dead limo. I was going to give them a ride. Story 69, my wedding 6 months ago. One of the bridesmaids was in charge of the hair and makeup. Let's call her Jennifer. At the bachelorette party, Jennifer and a chaperone danced to "I've Had the Time of My Life" and attempted to nail the jump and lift move from Dirty Dancing. They failed, and she nearly face-planted onto the sharp corner of a granite countertop. My wife made her swear that she would not attempt that maneuver at the wedding. Jennifer purchased her bridesmaid dress just a week before the ceremony, already down to the wire. The day before the wedding, at the rehearsal dinner, she revealed that she had found a better dress on Amazon, and so she ordered that one and returned the old one. The new dress had not yet arrived, but it's okay. It's a prime delivery and it's due to arrive tomorrow morning, the day of the wedding. And Amazon generally does not do morning deliveries in her part of town, so I don't know how she arranged that one. So, my soon-to-be bride is freaking out about one of her bridesmaids taking a stupid, pointless gamble like that. But the morning of the wedding, Jennifer's dress arrives and all is saved, right? Wrong. Jennifer lives about an hour away from the venue, and she was, by her own admission, up all night Snapchatting. So instead of coming to the venue and helping us set up, she decides to get some sleep. From 9 a.m. to around 1:30 p.m. Weddings at 5:30, and this time was carefully chosen in order to get a beautiful sunset in the pictures. She gets on the road at 2:15 and has an hour's drive to the venue, where the bride's makeup is supposed to be underway at 2:45. Jennifer arrives around 3:15. Bride is already trembling with frustration, and Jennifer runs in and immediately bursts into tears and says, "I'm so far behind. I'm about to have a freak out. Could I please get a hug?" A group hug ensues. She finally calms down and gets straight to work on steaming her dress right out of the box. She hadn't even tried it on. Once that's taken care of, she finally starts on the bride's makeup and hair. The ceremony started over 30 minutes late because of her, but it went swimmingly and my wife looked beautiful. What followed was an awesome reception. It was so fun that my brother's snooty bitch of a wife, who hates dancing and any music not included in the Twilight Saga soundtrack, literally dragged him and my nephew out to their car and ghosted us without having even met my wife. But that's another story. Then the final dance. My wife selected Time of My Life and reminded Jennifer that she was not allowed to do the jump. She did anyway. I know, not surprising at this point in the story. Predictably, her date, who was unaware of her previous attempt in Solemn Promise, failed to catch her properly and almost fell over, trying to keep her from face-planting and breaking her neck. She ended up basically flipping over his shoulder, and in his attempt to catch her, he yanked her dress up to her waist, flashing her G-stringed ass to the whole reception. That was the last straw. My wife lost her, shouted at Jennifer to get out, and stormed off the dance floor. Jennifer tried to apologize, but the bride could only hold off Bridezilla for so long, and enough was enough. You almost broke your damn neck doing that stupid dance that you promised you wouldn't do. You fucked around and didn't even try to help us decorate the venue. You changed your dress at the last minute, and you made me late for my own wedding. You're done. They hugged it out at brunch the next morning, but haven't hung out since. My brother and his wife still have not met my wife. Story 70, the highlights of our own wedding. Sar Fael called first thing in the morning to tell us he and Mill were on their way to our place. But Mill was having an exceptionally bad schizophrenic episode. It was everything he could do to get her in the shower, into her dress, and into the car. When they arrived, she wouldn't get out of the car, then wouldn't come into the house, then wouldn't let my wife leave to get her hair done. Fael had to physically hold her back so my wife could get past. Even though it was supposed to be a clear, sunny day, it began to rain during setup, so we had to quickly move the ceremony away from the really cool waterfall and pond to the downstairs venue. The lady who baked our wedding cake called in tears to say it had tipped over in her minivan en route to the venue. Only the small top tier was salvageable. I raced into town to the only bakery that was open and bought what was available, all prepackaged desserts just so we would have something. I'd arrived back home to find Mel, Fael, and my wife struggling in the doorway and my wife crying. Mel would not let her out of the house so we could drive to the venue. She had gotten it in her mind that if my wife left, she wouldn't be able to get back in later because she would be too big. For context, she had a way of saying some pretty wild things or repeating herself when she wasn't doing well. Again, Phil had to hold her back so my wife could get out. She cried most of the way to the venue. Once at the venue, Mill wandered around in a daze, crying half the time, and telling everyone she came in contact with that she wanted to go home with Phil. We tried to reassure her that she wasn't being left behind and would in fact be going home that night with Fael, but she continued to repeat it. Once the vows had taken place and we sat down to eat, nobody wanted to make a toast. Eventually, Bill stood up and did his best, but it was extremely awkward and there was no response. Everyone sat blank-faced and stared at us. With dinner out of the way, we stood up to have our first dance as husband and wife. It was nice, but when the song was over, nobody got up to dance. For 4 or 5 songs, it was just the two of us, laughing nervously and making comments about being the only ones up there. Eventually, we just sat down again when only a couple of little kids came up. Before dinner was even finished, I noticed the crowd thinning and asked my mother where some of the family were. She told me my Uncle Fred had gone out to the car to sleep. I remember going, seriously? Our wedding is so boring he couldn't even sit at his table for 2 hours? By 8 p.m., the venue was pretty much a ghost town. Just before we closed up to go home, Phil told us he didn't want to make the hour drive back home that night and asked if he and Emil could stay at our place. We only had one bed and a dilapidated couch, so I had no idea where they planned to sleep. My wife's aunt and uncle pulled us aside and told us they found out about Fael's plans and had rented us a nice hotel room down the street. We were so grateful, but again had to struggle past Emael, blocking us in so we could go, which got my wife crying again. Once we checked in at the hotel, we were too tired to do anything other than collapse on the bed and watch TV.